Montana Territory, July 1881. The music in the ballroom spun like a golden thread around her. But all Sophia Gardener felt was the tightness of her corset and the ache in her chest. She stepped back from the polished floor, skirts brushing against ivory columns, and slipped out the side door into the cool summer night. The stars were sharp above the Bitterroot Mountains, and the air smelled of pine and dust. Her satin slippers crunched on gravel as she walked, fast, heart-pounding. She did not stop until the sound of violins faded into the wind. No one noticed her leave. That was the thing about parties like this: people smiled, nodded, and never really saw you. She kept walking. Down past the garden gates, along the trail that wound through tamarack and aspen. The moon was high when she spotted the flicker of orange between the trees. A campfire. Sophia hesitated. She was alone, unarmed, and in a gown worth more than most people earned in a year. But something tugged at her, something inside her chest that had been aching too long. She stepped into the clearing. The man by the fire did not rise. He looked up, calm, one hand resting on his knee, the other holding a tin cup near the flame. His hat cast a shadow over his eyes, but she could see they were steady. "You lost?" he asked, voice low. "No," she said. "I just needed some air." He nodded like that made all the sense in the world. "Well, there's fire and coffee." She walked closer. The fire crackled. Her slippers were ruined now, wet from dew and dirt, but she did not care. "I'm Sophia," she said, easing herself down on a flat rock. He watched her a moment before replying. "Gideon Graves." She looked at him, then really looked. He was young, maybe 28. Sun-browned skin, dark hair curling at the collar, and hands that looked like they had worked hard for everything they touched. He poured a second cup and handed it over. Their fingers brushed. Hers were cold. His were warm and rough. "What are you doing out here alone?" she asked. "Cattle drive passed through 2 days ago," Gideon said. "I stayed behind. I like the quiet." She smiled faintly. "Me too." They sat in silence for a while. The breeze rustled the pine needles. Somewhere an owl hooted. "You from the manor up the hill?" he asked. "Yes, big party." "Yes, you like parties." She looked into the fire. "Not that kind." He did not press. He just sipped his coffee, then leaned back on his saddlebag like he had all the time in the world. Sophia glanced down at her gown. Silk, champagne-colored, trimmed with real pearls. She had thought it would make her feel beautiful. Instead, it felt like armor. "My father wants me to marry some banker from Helena," she said quietly. Gideon did not say anything, but she could feel he was listening. "He does not love me. He barely knows me. But he likes my father's land and my mother's money." Gideon reached for a stick and poked the fire. "You going to marry him?" "I was supposed to say yes tonight." He glanced at her. "Did you?" "No." "Then you already know what you want." Her eyes burned. The wind shifted and the smoke curled around them. She blinked fast. "I do not know what I want. I just know what I do not." He tossed the stick into the fire. "That's a start." They sat in silence again. It was a good silence, not heavy, just real. Sophia looked up. "Do you sleep out here often?" "Most nights. I work the land. Fix fences, herd cattle, break horses when needed. Not much call for ballrooms." She smiled. "That sounds peaceful." "It is. Hard but quiet, no one telling you who to be." Sophia's throat tightened. She looked down again, then stood. Her dress brushed against the grass. "I should go back." "You sure?" he asked. She hesitated. "No," he stood too, tall and solid and kind. "You can stay by the fire if you want. I will not bother you." She looked into his face. He meant it. There was no pressure, no pretense. Just a man offering warmth to someone cold. "I will stay a little longer," she said. She sat again. He did too. Later, she lay wrapped in one of his blankets, her dress spread out to dry on a nearby log. He gave her his coat to drape over her shoulders. She watched the fire die down, then looked at him. "You really do not care about money, do you?" Gideon met her gaze. "No, I care about peace and honesty and good hands that do what they say they will." She smiled slowly. "I have never met anyone like you." He looked at her for a long moment. "Maybe you just never had the chance." Sophia's chest ached again, but this time it was not pain. It was something warmer, something that made her want to stay just a little longer. She turned toward the fire, her head resting against the saddlebag, and felt her eyes drift closed. Gideon stayed up a while longer, watching the fire, watching her sleep, and in the quiet, under the stars, something changed between them. Something small but real. It was the beginning when Sophia woke. The fire was down to coals, and the sky above had softened to the pale gray of early dawn. She sat up slowly, the wool coat slipping from her shoulders, and found Gideon a short distance away, crouched by a narrow stream, sleeves rolled to the elbow as he washed out a tin plate. He looked over his shoulder. "Mornin'." Her voice came rough. "Did I sleep long?" Till the birds started up. He stood, shook off the plate, and walked back toward the fire. "Figured you needed it." She pressed her palms into her lap. "I haven't slept through a night in a long time." He set the plate on a flat rock to dry and crouched beside the coals. "You hungry?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." He reached for a canvas sack tucked near his bedroll and pulled out a small loaf wrapped in cloth and a few leftover slices of smoked venison. "Ain't much," he said, slicing the bread with a short bladed knife. "But it's real." She accepted it without hesitation, chewing slowly as she watched him. The silence between them had shifted, easier now, the kind that didn't need filling. "Do you always carry the same food?" she asked after a while. "Mostly. Traded last week for that loaf." "Fella in Stevensville Mills decent flour." He glanced sideways. "Not what you're used to, I know." She shook her head. "That's not what I meant." He poured water into the tin cup and handed it to her. She drank, then let her gaze drift toward the trees. "My father's convinced I'll come around," she said. "He thinks I just need time to see the proposal as practical." Gideon didn't speak right away. "Then, is that what you're meant to be, a practical arrangement?" "I'm meant to be an asset," she said, voice low. "A name, a dowry, a way to widen someone's reach." He leaned back on his hands, looking up through the trees. "That what you want?" "No," she looked down at her hands, "but I haven't figured what the alternative is." He didn't offer an answer. Instead, he stood and kicked dirt over the last of the coals. "If you're not in a hurry, I've got a fence line not far from here. Could use a second pair of eyes." She looked up, startled. "You want me to help, only if you want to." She stood, brushing grass from her skirt with more care than she'd taken the night before. "I've never fixed a fence." "Then it'll be a fine morning for learning." The walk was quiet, save for the rhythm of boots and slippers on packed earth. The trail narrowed as they passed through a thicket of hawthorn and then opened into a wide meadow where a split-rail fence ran crooked along a hill. He handed her a pair of worn gloves from his saddlebag. "Watch your fingers on the wire." She took them, pulling them on carefully. "You don't think I'll ruin my hands? Don't strike me as the kind who minds a little dirt." She smiled faintly and followed him to the fence. He showed her how to hold the rail steady while he hammered a post back into place. She watched the swing of his arm, the precision of his work, and the way he paused between strikes to check the line. "Did someone teach you this?" she asked. "My uncle, after my father died. We ran a place near Great Falls for a while." He leaned on the post. "Lost it in the drought. Since then, I pick up work where I can." She met his eyes. "You've had to start over. Couple times." He shrugged. "It teaches you what matters." Sophia glanced down the fence line. "And what matters to you?" He didn't answer right away. He pulled the wire taut, fastened it to the post, then finally looked back at her. "Peace," he said, "and folks who mean what they say." They kept working side by side, the sun rising higher, warming the backs of their necks. She didn't notice when her gloves got stained or when a strand of hair slipped from its pin. She only knew the rhythm, the steadiness of it, the way his presence made silence feel safe. When they reached the last post, she leaned on it, breathing deep. "I think I understand now," she said. "Understand what?" "Why you stayed behind when the drive moved on." He wiped his brow with the back of his hand. "There's a kind of comfort in doing something honest." She looked at him then, really looked not just the man by the fire, but the one who had made room for her in a life that didn't ask for anything in return. "I don't want to go back yet," she said. "You don't have to." She nodded slowly. "My family won't understand." "Maybe not," he said. "But do you?" She reached for his hand, the glove rough between them. "I'm starting to." He didn't pull away, just let her hold on. The wind moved through the grass, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried. They stood there quietly, hands clasped over a rail they had set right together, a slant of morning sun casting long shadows behind them. Neither said it, but there was no need. Something real had started, and they both knew it. By late afternoon, the air had turned dry and golden. the kind of heat that clung to the skin and softened the edges of the hills. Sophia sat on a fallen log while Gideon checked the saddle straps on his dun mare, the quiet of the meadow folding around them like a blanket. "You always stay in one place this long?" she asked, watching as he pulled the girth tight. He glanced at her, then back to the horse. "Not often. Work's usually in motion, but this stretch of land's owned by a rancher out of Missoula. Hired me to mend what winter tore up. Said I could take my time." She folded her hands in her lap. "Would he mind if someone else stayed, just for a little while? That depend on the someone." She looked down at her hands, fingers still streaked with dirt beneath the gloves. "I'm not asking for forever. Just until I figure what comes next." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped back from the mare and looked toward the mountains that crowned the western sky. "You'd need a change of clothes," he said, "and boots that won't fold at the heel." Sophia smiled faintly. "That can be arranged." He nodded once, then turned back to her. "You'd also need to earn your place. This isn't a life that carries passengers." "I'm not afraid of work." A crease formed between his brows. "You might be, not the kind you've known. This sort doesn't end when the sun drops." "I don't need easy," she said. "I need real." He studied her face for a long moment, then tossed his gloves onto the saddle and sat beside her on the log. "You ever held a shovel?" "No." "Ever gathered tinder by hand, chopped wood, or slept through a thunderstorm with nothing but canvas above you?" She shook her head. "Then let's start with something smaller." He stood and offered his hand. She took it without blinking and followed him toward the edge of the trees, where the brush thickened and the ground sloped gently down toward a shallow rise. There, a wooden trough sat half buried in earth, the surface of the water greened with algae and buzzing with midges. "This needs clearing," he said. "If you're gonna stay, you start here." She stepped forward and crouched, pushing her sleeves past her elbows. Her fingers stung as she dipped them into the cold water, scooping out handfuls of leaves and thick moss. Gideon knelt beside her, working silently. The sun dipped lower, casting their shadows long against the grass. When the trough was clean, she leaned back on her heels and wiped her hands on her skirt without thinking. He handed her a rag from his back pocket. "You'll ruin that dress." "I think it's already decided." He chuckled, low and surprised. "You're not what I expected." She turned to him. "What did you expect? A girl who'd run back to the party the moment her shoes touched dirt." "I think I stopped being that girl a long time ago." He nodded once. "All right then." They walked back to camp as the light began to settle, turning the tops of the pines to gold. Gideon stirred coals back to life while she gathered dry branches and learned which ones cracked clean and which held too much sap. When the fire caught, she sat cross-legged beside it, watching the flames twist upward. "My mother was born in Charleston," she said. "She used to tell me stories about the marshes, the smell of sweetgrass in the spring. She never spoke about Montana like that." He tilted his head. "Did she want to come west?" "She followed my father." "That's what women do when they marry men with land." "Not all women." Sophia tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "She died 3 winters ago, fever. My father changed after that, grew colder." Gideon fed a stick into the fire. "That kind of loss does that to a man," she nodded. "I think he loved her in his own way, but he didn't know what to do with me after." "You remind him of her. Only in the way that makes him uncomfortable." The flames danced between them, casting orange light across his profile. "You don't have to prove anything to me," he said. "Not about where you came from, not about why you're here. I'm not trying to prove anything, I just want to be seen." He looked at her then, not as he had before, but deeper, like someone who understood what it meant to be worn raw by silence. "I see you," he said. A breeze stirred the pine needles. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "What happens now? That depends on how long you plan to stay." She pulled her knees close, voice soft. "I don't have anywhere else." He nodded once slowly. "Then you stay." Her throat tightened, but she didn't cry. Instead, she reached across the space between them and took his hand, the calluses brushing her skin. He didn't let go. The following week settled in slow, like dust after a long ride. Sophia rose not with bells or servants, but with the scent of dew on canvas and birdsong stitched through the trees. Each day brought a different task, mending saddle straps, boiling water for washing, hauling kindling from the tree line. She learned where the ground turned soft after rain and how to test a coil of rope for wear without unraveling it. Gideon never hovered, just pointed once, then watched what she did with it. Late one morning, while she rinsed clothes in the creek, her voice broke the hush. "Do you ever ride just to ride?" Gideon was sitting on a flat stone nearby, his boots damp from wading in. "Sometimes, when the weather's good and I've got nothing hunting me." "What would hunt you?" He tossed a pebble into the water. "Debt, men with thin patience." "My own stubbornness." She wrung out a blouse and draped it over a branch. "I never learned to ride properly. I was led around gardens on ponies with braided manes. Plenty of folks learn late. If you want to, I'll teach you." She dipped her hands back in the stream. "I'd like that." The next morning, he brought the gentlest of the horses, an aging bay named Clove with a pale muzzle and a habit of nodding off if not nudged twice. Sophia approached with cautious hands. "She looks tired. She's steady." "That's what you want first time out." He adjusted the stirrups, then helped her into the saddle. She wobbled, gripped too tight with her knees, and leaned forward like the horse might outrun her thoughts. "Sit back," he said, tone even. "Let the weight settle in your hips, not your shoulders." She breathed through her nose and eased her spine straight. The ground didn't feel as far away as she'd feared. Gideon took the reins gently and walked beside her as Clove ambled up the path. They moved through the trees, the mare's hooves soft against the dirt, Sophia's face slowly relaxing with each step. "When I was young," she said, "I used to sneak into the stables just to sit on the fence and watch the grooms work. They thought I was trying to catch the eye of one of the boys." "Were you?" She gave a small laugh. "No, I just liked how quiet it was. Everyone knew what they were doing. I didn't feel like I had to talk." Gideon watched the trail ahead. "Talking's overrated when the work speaks for itself." They rode in silence after that, the kind she'd come to recognize as his way of making room. After a mile or so, he led her into a clearing where the grass rose knee-high and the wind bent it in waves. He tied the mare to a low branch and sat beside her in the shade. "You ever think about going east?" she asked. "Used to. Thought I might find my uncle again. He left for Kansas when I was 17. But it never lined up right. Would you go if it did?" He reached down and pulled a blade of grass between his fingers. "Maybe, but I don't chase what doesn't call for me." Sophia leaned back against the tree. "There's something strange about being wanted only for what you can give a man. My father's friends all ask after me like I'm a piece of property." "You're not." "No," she said, "but it's hard to believe that sometimes." He turned toward her. "You think I ask you to ride because I want a dowry?" She met his eyes. "No. That's not what I meant." "I know." He let the grass fall. "Just want to be sure we're clear." They stayed in the clearing until the shadows stretched long. On the ride back, she let herself lean into the rhythm of the horse, trusting the sway, the weight, the way the reins felt steady in her hands. That night, after the fire was banked low and the sky spilled over with stars, they sat by the coals, knees close but not touching. Sophia spoke first. "If I stayed longer, if I made something useful of myself here, would that be all right?" Gideon didn't look away from the flame. "You've already done that." She turned her head toward him, eyes soft in the low light. "I'm still figuring out how to belong." He looked at her, then no hesitation, no pity, just quiet certainty. "You're not passing through, Sophia, not anymore," she exhaled, long and even. The night wrapped around them, and for the first time in memory, she didn't feel like she was running from anything. She was just there still, and seen and steady as the earth beneath her. The first frost came early that year, brushing the meadow in silver and turning the creek's edges to glass. Sophia woke before the light fully broke, her breath clouding as she pulled on the trousers Gideon had mended for her with spare thread and a surgeon's precision. She stepped outside the canvas tent they now shared, boots firm in the rutted dirt, and watched the steam rise off the horses' backs, the world still and waiting. Gideon was already at the corral, hammering a new gate latch into place. He didn't glance up as she approached, just passed her the other half of the hinge like he'd known she'd come. "You ever think about building something permanent?" she asked, holding the wood steady with her knee. He gave the hinge a final tap. "I have. Just never thought I'd have reason to." Sophia traced her fingers along the grain of the gate. "You do now." He looked at her then, a pause long enough to let the meaning settle between them. That afternoon, they rode north to a parcel of land that sloped gently toward the trees, the soil dark and soft from the last melt. It belonged to a man Gideon knew from years back, a veteran with a limp and a fondness for chess, who lived alone in a sod house and kept bees. He was looking to sell a portion before winter. Sophia stood on the edge of that field, coat buttoned high, her gloved hands tucked beneath her elbows. "You think the ground'll hold?" she asked. Gideon stepped past her, knelt, and scooped a handful. He let it fall between his fingers like sand. "It'll hold." They made the trade the following week, the deed witnessed by a traveling notary who wrapped his ink pot in a wool sock to keep it from freezing. Gideon and Sophia signed side by side beneath the tree where they planned to raise the first wall come spring. That night, she sat cross-legged on the floor of the tent, sorting seeds into small cloth bundles. Gideon sharpened a hatchet by the fire, the room warm with lamplight and the smell of boiled beans. Neither said much until she reached for the last pouch. "I'm scared," she admitted. He didn't turn. "Of what? Of being happy, of trusting it." He set the blade down and crossed to her. "You don't have to trust happiness, just trust me." She looked up, her eyes catching the firelight. "I do." He drew her close then, arms solid around her shoulders, and held her like something he meant to keep. She leaned into him, her cheek against his shirt, and let herself believe it. The days shortened. Snow came in slow flurries, then in earnest. They moved into a one-room cabin Gideon had helped raise 3 years earlier for another hand who'd never come back to claim it. The stove smoked at first, but Sophia learned fast how to bank the coals and keep the kettle warm. They built shelves from pine, nailed hooks for coats and bridles, and rigged a line across the back wall to dry garments soaked through with woodcutting or snow melt. Sophia painted the front door blue with leftover milk paint she bartered for in town, and when Gideon saw it, he only nodded. "Looks like it belongs." On the last day of February, they rose early and walked the edge of their land, marking where the fence would go come thaw. Sophia stopped near a patch of wild aster, dead for the season but still standing. "I used to think my life would be made of walls I didn't choose," she said. Gideon crouched beside her, brushing snow from the brittle stalks. "And now, I get to choose you." He stood, took her hands between his. "Then let's put it down right." They married in early March, when the snow still clung to the hills but the sun stayed longer in the sky. The ceremony was small, held in the kitchen of the rancher's wife who'd sold them the mare. She lent Sophia a wool shawl, and Gideon wore a collar shirt he hadn't touched since his sister's wedding 8 years prior. Afterward, they rode home slow, their hands touching between the saddles. Inside the cabin, they lit a fire, closed the door, and let the world outside fall away. In spring, the seeds Sophia had sorted began to bloom. She planted them in rows behind the house, bent over with dirt beneath her nails, Gideon building the fence in long, even stretches that ran along the creek and up to the trees. They didn't speak of what might have been, only of what was growing. By summer, the roof bore weight without complaint, the fence stood straight, and the meadow turned gold with sorghum and corn. One evening, as dusk fell and the fields darkened to shadows, Sophia sat on the porch steps, her hair pulled back with twine and her hands wrapped around a mug of chicory Gideon brewed with bitterness she'd come to like. He joined her, their knees touching just enough. "You still scared?" he asked. "Not anymore." "Why?" "Because I'm not waiting for something to go wrong. I'm here, with you." He leaned in, kissed her temple, then rested his forehead against hers. They stayed like that until the stars came, soft and quiet, wrapped in everything they'd made. And it was enough, and it would always be.